What's going on, guys? This is Rob. If you guys enjoy my content, make sure you hit the subscribe button and make sure you hit that little bell so you never miss out on my sexy voice. All right, what's going on, guys? This is Rob, and I'm actually periscoping while I'm recording this. If you guys don't know, I have Periscope, which lets me live stream to Twitter, and you can find me, periscope.com or whatever it is, /Comics Explain. Anyway, just follow me on Twitter on Comics Explain, and you'll see my Periscopes there. Anyway, I wanted to have this discussion about why Spider-Man is so popular, right? I mean, there's all different kinds of levels of like the argument when it comes to Spider-Man's popularity. Like there are some people that will say Spider-Man is as popular, if not more popular than like Superman. And that is a whole different discussion for a whole nother time. That's one that we're not even gonna get into here because that opens a kettle of beans that quite frankly, I just don't wanna open. But when it comes to the idea of Spider-Man and what he's capable of, his popularity will ensure that he stands the test of time as one of the most iconic superheroes ever. But the question is why? Why is Spider-Man so popular? So let's wind the clock back. So 1938, a Superman shows up for the very first time and just takes the world by storm. I mean, it was nuts. I mean, going back and reading articles of when he first appeared, people's reactions to it, it was something that had never really been seen before. A superhero that was virtually bulletproof, who could jump at insanely high levels, who could run insanely fast. You know, he was bulletproof, and the peak of human conditioning was new to everybody. He had a costume, had a cape, that kind of thing. It made it look like he flew. It was really cool. I mean, the power of flight wouldn't come until a couple years after his character was created. But on the whole, Superman set a whole new standard when it came to superheroes in this new medium. But on the whole, Superman's popularity stemmed from the fact that he fought on behalf of the common man. Superman's early stories saw him fighting against, jewel thieves, which protected store owners. Saw him fighting against murderers, which protect the people they were trying to murder. It had him fighting against government corruption, which protect the citizen body. Had him fighting against corrupt corporations and different things like that. And the more Superman became popular, the more characters that were created in order to capitalize on that popularity, which meant that as time went on, we eventually got Wonder Woman and Aquaman and Shazam, this little kid Billy Batson, who would shout the word Shazam and become basically somebody who is equivalent to Superman. We got heroes like the Flash, Jay Garrick, the original Green Lantern, Alan Scott. And despite the fact that their own powers varied, despite the fact that their origin stories were different from those of Superman, at the end of the day, they were still superheroes. Batman was the only real exception. He was a little bit darker, he was a little more gritty, more of an anti-hero than anything else, but all roads led to Rome. He was still saving the day at the end of his comics just by doing it through a different means. The popularity of those traditional superheroes led to the introduction of younger superheroes. Of course, Billy Batson had already been established as a little kid, but when he became Shazam, it wasn't a little kid with powers, it was a grown adult with powers. And that was the essence of comic book superheroes back then. The heroic quality, as it was deemed by comic book creators, was something that was only attainable by adults. Only adults had the wisdom to be superheroes. Only adults had the wisdom to really understand right from wrong. Now, sidekicks were introduced, which introduced the teenage element into comic books, but at the end of the day, sidekicks weren't viewed as superheroes. Sidekicks were viewed as superheroes in training. Dick Grayson, Robin, was training to become as good as Batman. Aqualad was training to become as good as Aquaman. Kid Flash was training to become as good as the Flash. That was the role they played in comics. And this was designed to mirror real life. Even in this day and age, as adults, we look around and say, man, when I was a teenager, I really thought I knew the ways of the world, but I don't. I didn't know how things worked when I was 16 years old. I was just young and dumb. Now, there are all different walks of life, and there are some 16-year-olds who are more experienced than 30-year-olds. But on the whole, a larger majority of people as adults know more and understand more than they did when they were teenagers, and comic books reflected that. The reason why Spider-Man is so popular is because he broke that transition. He broke that change. He broke that mold almost in its entirety. Instead of Spider-Man training to become a superhero under some other greater superhero out there, he was just suddenly thrust into the world of heroes. Captain America grabbed his shield and led the Avengers into the mighty charge against Hydra or Advanced Idea Mechanics. Superman, come on, Justice League, we can do this, and he led the charge of the Justice League against some villain. But Spider-Man never had that. He tried to join the Fantastic Four in his first issue and they turned him down. Instead, the training of Spider-Man came by way of the death of his Uncle Ben. The real world slapped him in the face so hard that suddenly he just had to adapt. He had to get used to things. He had to suddenly realize what it meant to be a hero. There was no Captain America saying, all right, Spider-Man, let's go sit down and let me teach you everything you need to know about being a superhero. He had to figure it out on his own. He had his Aunt May to guide him and to be his moral compass, but he was literally just flying by the seat of his pants almost the entire time. that relatability extended to the average comic reader, because which one of us can ever really say that we understand life so perfectly we know everything we need to do in order to achieve success as we make our way through there? Not at all. Everybody's flying by the seat of their pants. Everybody's taking it one day at a time. Everybody makes mistakes, realizing they screwed up, and then tries to correct those. Maybe they can, maybe they can't. But nobody has a perfect understanding about how the way the world works, and Spider-Man reflected that. The other half of this is teenagers. Empowering teenagers. The largest base for comic book readership in comic books was teenagers. I mean, granted, as the years go on, teenagers who started reading grew into adults who continued reading, but the influx of comic book readers was almost always teenagers, and it was usually always young boys. But the idea was that when they were reading comic books back in the 1940s and 1950s and the early 1960s, if they were reading superheroes, they weren't the star of the show. They were just along for the ride. They were just learning how to become a superhero. Spider-Man came along and said, no. All right, teenage readers, you're not along for the ride. You're on the ride. You are the star of the show. You're not dancing next to the main attraction. You are the main attraction. And it empowered teenagers because it made them feel like they were important. It made them feel like they mattered. It made them feel like they were the reason why there's so much success. It was almost like an in-comic book adaptation to the success of comic books. Comic books grew in popularity and stayed popular because teenagers read them. And now it almost felt like for a lot of teenagers, or at least I would imagine anyway, that their work, their effort had been, was basically being recognized. It was being paid off. And so because of that, when teenage boys sat down and they read Amazing Fantasy number 15, they would see this kid who was like nerdy, just like they were. This kid who was being picked on, just like they were. This kid who couldn't get the girl, just like they couldn't. But instead of just having this comic that says, yep, man, life is rough and it's just gonna kind of be that way, suddenly Peter Parker gets bitten by a radioactive spider on a science trip. And now that bully Flash Thompson gets what's coming to him. Now his nerdiness helps him to become a better superhero. And oh my God, do the girls love him. He was everything those teenage boys aspired to be. Now, that was the teenage element. That was the teenage aspect. But teenage reading isn't enough to keep a comic book running forever. You also have to maintain the readers who are adults, who grew up reading comic books as teenagers and kept on going as adults. And that's where the other half of Spider-Man's success came into play. Spider-Man was a dude who was just struggling day in and day out. The Avengers never had financial issues. Tony Stark, the richest man in the world, was a founding member of the Avengers team, and he just bankrolled the Avengers. He gave them a place to live, gave them a base of operations. You never worried about money when you read the Avengers comics. When you sat down and read Avengers number 4, where they discovered Captain America for the very first time, when you read Avengers number 10 or Avengers number 20 or Avengers number 30, the topic of, oh man, guys, like rent's due, how are we gonna pay that? That never came up. It was just the Avengers flying headlong into some adventure against Loki or the Incredible Hulk or some, small-time villain that was created just for the story. There was no discussion about bills. There was no discussion about money. There was no discussion about, oh man, I wonder if I'm gonna be able to take my girlfriend on a date tonight. But that discussion was in Spider-Man. That discussion was in Spider-Man as Peter Parker was defeating a villain and then heading back home and then realizing rent was due that day and he was late, but he didn't have any money and he didn't know how he was gonna pay it. That discussion came up when he was trying to figure out where he was gonna take Gwen Stacy to dinner because he didn't really have any money. And that resonated with people, especially like in this day and age, because college kids struggle all over the place. But the idea of struggling financially is not a new thing. It's not a post, 2008, economic crisis thing. It's always been that way. There's always been people who have struggled financially. There's always been people who have been trying to figure out how they're going to take it from one day to the next. There's always been people who have boyfriends and girlfriends, significant others, and are trying to figure out how they're going to go with them to enjoy an evening without having enough money to actually enjoy it lavishly. And that was a core part of the Spider-Man stories. How's rent going to get paid? How are the bills going to get paid? Where is this going? How long is he really going to be Spider-Man? This is compounded by the fact that for the most part, because Spider-Man didn't have the same kind of grand, huge villains like the Avengers or the Incredible Hulk or Thor had, a lot of the superhero community didn't take him wildly seriously. It wasn't like, oh man, we've got to have Spider-Man on our side. It wasn't like the Avengers were facing off against some threat and said, oh my God, guys, you know who's going to help us? Spider-Man. That almost never happened. Instead, it was, God, guys, man, we're being absolutely crushed, but we're the Earth's mightiest heroes. We'll deal with it on our own because we have Thor and we have Captain America. We've got like some of the most successful powerhouses in comics. Why do we need Spider-Man? Even then, among the audience base, the casual person who knew of Spider-Man but didn't really read him, myself included, Spider-Man was never taken seriously. Oh, okay, yeah, cool, Spider-Man. He's a guy that dresses in a suit and climbs up walls. Wahoo, I'm gonna go read my X-Men with a mutant that can warp reality on a universal scale. But what's so funny about that is like Spider-Man's spider sense, the one ability that he has that alerts him to danger before it happens is the one thing that makes him more successful than virtually any other character out there. That's one of the reasons why whenever you have major crossover events, for the most part, Spider-Man's usually the last man standing. Spider-Man's intelligence, his wittiness, added kind of a freshness to comic books. Where he would be going against villains, he'd crack jokes, he'd throw them off kilter. It wouldn't be like Captain America where he took himself super seriously and just started beating the heck out of him with his shield. Spider-Man would poke fun at Dr. Octopus while he was beating the crap out of him. He would poke fun at Electro while he was beating the crap out of him. Now, of course, we would find out in later years the reason why Spider-Man did that is because it was designed to throw his villains off kilter. They're taking themselves seriously. But if they believe that Spider-Man's not taking themselves seriously, they'll get angry. And in their anger, they'll stop fighting rationally. I think that was explained during Amazing Spider-Man Renew Your Vows as part of Secret Wars, but I'm sure it was probably explained before that. But those elements are what made Spider-Man so relatable and so popular. The humor, the simple relatability of struggling financially, trying to find a good job, the relatability of not knowing when bills are going to get paid, the relatability of trying to be taken seriously by the rest of the superhero community and even comic book readers themselves. That's the reason why Spider-Man will always stand the test of time. That's the reason why Spider-Man will always be one of the most iconic superheroes in the history of comic books. Even if its success drops off, even if in 50 years, Spider-Man's popularity is virtually gone and no one reads him anymore and Marvel cancels him, the legacy he created will live on forever. People will always say, yep, Spider-Man, I remember him. It'll always just kind of be an intrinsic facet of the superhero community. But with that being said, guys, we're gonna go ahead and bring this video to an end. If you are new here to Comics Explained, make sure you guys hit the sub button to become part of the Rob Corps. If you guys enjoyed this video, make sure you drop a like and I will catch you all later. Peace.